Welcome to Who's That Pokemon, the only twice-weekly Pokemon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. I am your host, Brandon, and if you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokemon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it seems to kind of be neglected by Pokemon fans, so I thought it was about time I got a podcast entirely dedicated to it. Today's episode is episode 5 of the Indigo League season titled Showdown in Pewter City. The Japanese title for this episode is Nibi Gym Battle, so kind of similar except more straightforward and to the punch there. It's straight up just telling you that Ash is going to be battling the Pewter City Gym. This episode first aired on April 29th, 1997 in Japan, and in the United States on September 14, 1998. On this day in Pokemon history for the Japanese air date, it's Fumihiko Taichiki's birthday. I hope I didn't butcher that name too badly. He's the voice of Lieutenant Surge, Professor Birch, and Brock's Ludicolo, among other voices in the Japanese English language version. People may also know him from his voices in One Piece, Bleach, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. He's in a whole lot of quite notable anime series, so he's put together quite a resume even outside of his few notable Pokemon voices. And we've also got in 2010, Super Smash Bros. Brawl was released in South Korea, which features quite a lot of Pokemon in it. Lucario, Pokemon Trainer, featuring one of each of the Kanto starters, Jigglypuff. So yeah, it's got quite a heavy Pokemon representation in that. For the American air date here, we've got the Nintendo GameCube being released in Japan in 2001. The final Advanced Generation episode aired on this date. That is Home is Where the Start Is, and that's in Japan. And in 2012, Pokemon Batrio was released in Japan. The screenplay for this episode was written by Junki Takagami. This was his first ever episode writing on the show, and he's actually still writing for the show as of Sun and Moon, which I've mentioned in the last episode is kind of a staple for Pokemon writers. They basically still have such a heavy contingent of writers who were there at the very beginning in the first handful of episodes, which is maybe it might be a Japanese thing, but I feel like that's something you don't really see in American TV shows. I think the only thing that the only show that you can kind of really compare like decently to Pokemon in this sort of aspect is The Simpsons, which has been on for about 10 years longer, and a lot of the guys that were really working heavily on writing the show in the first few seasons, they, for the most part, aren't around anymore. So yeah, it's kind of rare to see something like this, particularly in the West. So the debuts for this episode, we have our human debuts here, and it sees Flint, Brock's siblings, Forrest, Salvador, Yolanda, Tommy, Cindy, Susie, Timmy, Billy, and Tilly all being introduced. And yes, all of those do have multiple appearances. I think actually Brock's siblings are in at least like 3, maybe even 4 episodes. Mostly thanks to Chronicles, I believe. Chronicles did give some extra shine to a lot of more minor characters like Brock's siblings. And the debuts for Pokemon in this episode, we get the debut of Brock's Onix and Brock's Geodude. And the Who's That Pokemon for this episode is Onix. So with all the episode info out of the way, we can move on to our episode summary and discussion. This episode kicks off in a way that would be very familiar to anybody who is well acquainted with the Pokemon anime. Team Rocket are finishing up digging a hole trap, and they disguise it with soil leaves and wood over the top to try and lure the gang into it. However, they end up falling into it themselves after they forget its location. Meanwhile, Ash, Misty, and Pikachu arrive at the outskirts of Pewter City, and as Ash takes a rest on some rocks, he and Misty meet a mysterious man named Flint, who apparently sells rocks for a living.
Huh? What the? Who's this old guy?
Never met him.
The name's Flint, and you're sitting on some of my merchandise, young man.
Oh, sorry. You mean you sell rocks?
They're Pewter City souvenirs. Want to buy some?
No, thanks.
The episode has barely begun and there's quite a bit to talk about here. Bit of trivia first off. This episode actually introduces Team Rocket's pitfall trap gag. So this gag that they're going to be using for the next 20 years, this is where it debuted in Showdown in Pewter City. And also, the show kicks off with Jesse and James reciting their motto, and I'm just thinking, as soon as I flicked on the episode, who are they even reciting the motto to? Like, is this like a morale thing? Like, let's recite the motto to kind of keep morale up as we have these futile efforts to try and steal Pikachu from Ash, because there's no one around except them and Meowth. So I thought that was a little quirky. When Ash comes to the kind of clearing in the forest and sees Pewter City in the distance, it just looks absolutely massive. Like it looks like a gigantic town, which is, I feel like it's something that the anime always does. Like, no matter what, whenever they go to a town with a gym in it, they make it seem like a massive, huge, like bustling city center type setup, which in the games, it's not always like that. I mean, Pewter City is relatively big, but you come across a fair few towns in the various games where they have a gym there, but it's still pretty quaint, and it's not like your typical kind of like big metropolis type city, which is how Pewter City is. But I think it does evoke the kind of same feeling that you would get as a kid when you would enter a new town when playing the games, which, you know, I dig that, because at the time, I think it would have been a nice representation of how it felt to play the games, even though the graphics and the technical limitations probably didn't reflect that. I need to get my hate for Flint out of the way early. Flint is just a deadbeat loser. He quite literally left his family to sell rocks. He's sitting there selling rocks, and that's what he's doing instead of going back and facing his family. A little bit of minor trivia here. In the dub, the letters in the episode title are in all capitals, which I'm not sure why they did that. Maybe they did it to emphasize kind of the importance of this episode being Ash's first gym battle, and he's going to get his first badge here. We've already got an error. Ash tells Flint that his goal is to become a Pokemon trainer. However, this is actually technically untrue. Ash is already a Pokemon trainer, and his goal is to become a Pokemon master. So, just a little bit of a mix-up in wording there. I did think it was weird when I rewatched the episode and he says he wants to be a Pokemon trainer, and it's like, well, you already are a Pokemon trainer. You've been a Pokemon trainer for 2 weeks, according to this episode, so you've already achieved that goal. And just a little bit of background about Flint's voice actor. He is voiced by Ted Lewis, who you've probably heard me mention a couple times throughout the podcast already. We're only 5 episodes in, but he's come up quite a bit because he actually has quite a lot to do with the early goings-on of the show. So he was also the voice of James at this point in time. Coincidentally, Flint would later be played by Eric Stewart in an episode of Pokemon Chronicles, who ends up replacing Ted Lewis as the voice of James, I think in episode 8. Eric Stewart was supposed to temporarily take over, but ended up taking the role for the entirety of the first 8 seasons, after it was made clear to the dubbers that James and the rest of the Team Rocket trio was more comical than they first thought, and Stewart's voice was more fitting. In addition to voice acting, Lewis was an assistant director during the 5th season of the show, and wrote the adaptation for several episodes of Pokemon Chronicles. As with most other voice actors who worked with 4Kids, he left the series after the 8th season when Pokemon USA and TAJ Productions took over the dubbing and distribution of the series. His main roles were Giovanni and Tracy, and they were taken over by Craig Blair, until Lewis actually returned to the anime in a full-course tag battle where he voiced Roman, and he returned to the role of Giovanni in The Thief That Keeps on Thieving. And viewers might, as I kind of mentioned, would probably also know him as the voice of everybody's favourite character, Tracy Sketchit. And he's also the announcer for both Pokemon Stadium games, which I don't really like Ted Lewis's James voice, but he can really do no wrong for me because that Pokemon Stadium voice is like burnt into my brain. That is an iconic voice to me. It might not be for a lot of other people, but it is for me. So I've got to show my love for Ted Lewis here. And he actually did quite a lot on the anime, a lot more than I realized. He wasn't just a voice. He actually was an assistant director during the 5th season, which I wasn't expecting. So back to the episode here. Flint escorts Ash, Misty, and Pikachu to the Pokemon Center, where Ash is surprised to encounter Nurse Joy again. He hasn't really figured out what the deal is with Nurse Joys yet, or Pokemon Centers. She explains that she is the Viridian City Joy's older sister. She directs Ash's attention to a poster promoting a tournament called the Pokemon League Championship, and he decides he's going to sign up. But before he can enter, he needs to defeat 8 Pokemon Gym leaders and earn a gym badge from each as proof of his victory. Flint walks in at this point and tells Ash about Pewter City's gym leader Brock. He is very skeptical of Ash's chances of winning and actually laughs at Ash for thinking that he can take on Brock. Ash and Misty kind of sit down to have a bite, have a meal, and Misty warns Ash that gym leaders have prodigious skill, and she actually offers to give him some advice and, some sort of mentorship before he battles the Pewter City Gym. And she ends up becoming angry when Ash declines this help, and she walks off, leaving him to foot the bill for their meal.
What's the matter?
To compete in the regional championships, you need to beat gym trainers from different towns and get their badges as proof. Can you do that?
Of course I can.
Don't tell me you plan on challenging Brock, the Pewter City Gym leader.
Of course I do. As soon as Pikachu and my other Pokemon are better, I'll have no problem. Take me to this Brock's gym. I'll beat him.
I really love the unique design of the Pokemon Center here. It's so much different to the one in Viridian City. The Viridian City's one is real kind of circular, a big dome really, in its shape. Whereas this one's more kind of blocky, which I think really does go with Pewter City's kind of theming with having the rock type gym there. And overall, I think the way that they're having each Pokemon Center to be something really grand and different from the last one, really bold, I think it's a really good choice. It's not something, if, say, I was, going to be part of the anime and I'm going to be adapting the games, I think I would have fallen into the trap of just being like, well, what do they look like in the games? Oh, they look like kind of, a smallish sort of medical center. Oh, well, we'll just do the same thing. Let's be faithful to the games. Obviously, the games didn't really have the resources at the time to make anything this kind of extravagant. So I think the decision for the directors and the people involved with, in charge of the design and animation of the show, I think it was a great choice to kind of go with more like, no, we'll make them like real-life hospitals, which usually, they have unique architecture. So big thumbs up from me there. This episode, obviously, it establishes that there are multiple Nurse Joys who are all part of a large extended family. So we're getting a lot of series staples established here. The Pitfall gag, establishing the multiple Nurse Joys part of a large extended family. So a lot of continuity that will, continue to be a part of the show for many years to come. We've got an error here from the Brazilian Portuguese dub of all things. Nurse Joy actually refers to Ash's Pidgeotto and Butterfree as a singular Pokemon. So a little weird quirk from a dub that most people listening to this podcast would have never, ever listened to. I thought that it was a little bit weird that Ash didn't know about the Pokemon League, especially because in the very first episode, it seems like he's watching a league battle or something to the effect of that. It feels like Ash would know about that. But then again, I'm not going to question it too much because Ash is purely like this to be an audience surrogate. He's there to, ask the questions that the viewers probably have. So I can't fault it too much, but it does seem a little weird that Ash wouldn't know about the Pokemon League. And there's probably ways to get around it without having Ash not completely know about it, but, I can't fault it too much. So he does see that Pokemon League poster, and a little fun fact, the poster in the Pokemon Center of the Pokemon League uses the type symbols from the TCG. Specifically, it uses the lightning, psychic, grass, fighting, fire, and water symbols, which are a nice little nod to the TCG, and they actually do use those symbols quite a bit throughout, which is kind of a little cool thing that they do. And finally, Ash is just really, really arrogant here in his abilities. He's so confident when dismissing Misty's help to go up against the Pewter City Gym, which it's completely fits his character at this point. Ash is just so kind of headstrong and doesn't want to take much advice from other people. He believes that he has the abilities to just do it all on his own. And that's really his downfall in Kanto. We actually see that pay off in the Pokemon League. And I think it's actually a really great example of kind of character development and a character arc in the Pokemon anime, which a lot of people talk about the Pokemon anime like it's just complete trash. But I think that is actually a really good character arc. Ash stops by the Pokemon Center again to pick up his healed team before making his way to the Pewter Gym. When he arrives, the gym is dark, though he soon meets the gym leader, Brock, and challenges him to a battle basically immediately. Brock queries Ash, and he replies that he has been traveling with Pikachu for 2 weeks. With a snap of his fingers, Brock transforms the gym into a rocky battlefield and turns on the lights. In the Pewter Gym, battles are 2 against 2 apparently. Ash begins the match with Pikachu, while Brock starts off with Onix. Pikachu is intimidated by the giant Pokemon and doesn't want to battle, but Ash responds by telling Pikachu that this is his battle, not any of his other Pokemon's. Pikachu's Thunder Shock is woefully ineffective against Onix's Bind, which begins to crush Pikachu, inflicting visible pain. This prompts Ash to recall Pikachu to its Pokeball, though the attempt is thwarted by the larger Pokemon's bulk. He can't actually recall Pikachu back to the Pokeball. And because of this, Ash cannot bear to watch it anymore. He can't stand by and let Pikachu suffer, so he forfeits the match.
Pikachu! Return! It's being blocked. I can't bring it back. Cut it out!
Do you surrender?
I do.
I need to talk about when Ash shows up at the Pewter Gym. I hate the way that Pewter Gym is printed on the gym's front here. It's been a while since you've seen it. Ash rocks up at the gym and it's a big kind of rocky building. And on the top left of it, it's kind of got like the words Pewter Gym carved into it. And this is actually kind of like a paint edit for the dub because it has the Japanese name for the gym there in obviously the original. So when they dubbed it, they couldn't have that there. They had to paint over it. But I really wish they had have just painted over it and not wrote Pewter Gym there. It just, I don't know, it doesn't look right. I think it would have looked way cool without any writing on it whatsoever. And it actually bothers me that they didn't center the name in the middle of the gym. If they were going to do that, I just question it. It just doesn't look right to me. Never been a fan. Bit of trivia though. This time to do with Eric Stewart, the voice of Brock. This is obviously our first introduction to Brock, so I thought I'd delve into who is the voice behind the man that we all know and love. So yes, he's voiced by Eric Stewart, who I mentioned before in my bit about Ted Lewis. And this lasted all the way until the 145th episode of the Advanced Generation series, after which he was replaced by Bill Rogers. Stewart was a real veteran of the Pokemon series. Apart from Brock, he also took over from Ted Lewis as the voice of James from episode 8 onwards, as I mentioned. He was also the voice of Butch, the Magikarp salesman who pops up quite a bit, and he voices Flint in the first Pokemon Chronicles episode, as I mentioned. He also happened to work on the production team for Jirachi Wishmaker, so much like Ted Lewis, very, very involved in the dubbing of the anime series, even going beyond just providing voices. Back to my critique of this episode though. I thought Brock has such a completely different personality in this episode. We kind of all know what Brock's personality is from the many, many years that he was in the show as a main cast member. But here he's so different. He's real kind of cold and just sort of really arrogant, which is a bit jarring when you go back and watch this. You're like, I don't remember Brock ever being like this after this episode, so it is a little bit weird. So at one point, Brock mentions that gym battles aren't like regular battles and that they have separate rules, and then that's when he explains that it's going to be a 2-on-2 battle. And I actually got a kick out of this. It gave me a bit of a chuckle because Ash literally to this point hasn't completed a single trainer battle. So it's like it hardly matters to Ash if the rules are different because he's barely experienced the regular rules. He had, a battle with Samurai last episode for about half a second before they had to run for their lives. So he really doesn't have any battling experience, which, it makes sense that he does so poorly in this gym battle. And makes it even more arrogant that he doesn't want to take Misty's advice for the battle. Here, Ash says that he's been traveling for 2 weeks, which seems like a ridiculously long time to get to Pewter City. And Brock's voice from Eric Stewart here, it seems very subdued. It kind of plays in with the kind of character that Brock has here. I think it's kind of similar to what they were saying about the voice switch between Ted Lewis and Eric Stewart, how they realized that James was a more comical character. Here, it seems like they're playing Brock as a more serious type character, but then almost immediately he becomes completely different. I don't know, and I think definitely in the direction that Eric Stewart would have been given for this episode, he would have been told to go in a more serious tone with the way Brock was speaking. I love the scale of Pokemon in the anime here. This is really the first time I've got to mention it because we get to see Onix come out. And, you know, according to the in-game Pokedex, Onix really isn't that tall. Same with Charizard. They have Charizard at 6 foot, which, I don't know, I just love the way that the anime handles scale. Onix is gigantic. It really towers over Pikachu. And I think that's really one aspect where the anime is a lot better than the games. However, I must give a shout out to the Let's Go games on the Switch. They really adjusted the kind of scaling for the models. When you see Onix in that, you encounter an Onix, it legitimately does feel huge, which shout out to them for making that change. And I hope in Sword and Shield they actually keep that, because it doesn't technically add anything to the actual gameplay, but it does add to the experience for me. So Ash forfeiting to spare Pikachu, it feels like a direct acknowledgement from sort of the lessons Ash learned in Challenge of the Samurai, the episode before this. In that, he kind of... in my critique of that episode, I thought it was dumb how they made Ash out as if he was a neglectful Pokemon trainer. But he does vow to treat his Pokemon better and make sure they don't get into any kind of dire situations like Metapod did in getting abducted by Beedrill ever again. So I do think it's kind of a nice little continuation here that he sees Pikachu in such pain, he knows that he can't call it back and that there's really no escape, so he forfeits the match to spare Pikachu. I think it's a nice little bit of continuity. And finally, some trivia. This is the only episode where Ash tries to actively recall Pikachu back into his Pokeball. As a dejected Ash leaves the gym, he encounters Flint once again, who suggests that Ash follows him to his home. Ash agrees, and over some tea, they discuss what happened in the gym battle. Flint notices that Ash is obviously extremely upset over the loss, so he consoles him with the knowledge that Brock could easily be an even better trainer than he already is. Ash is a little bit puzzled by this, but Flint refuses to elaborate on why Brock never kind of challenged the Pokemon League or did anything like that. Instead, he leads Ash outside to peer over a hedge into another house. It's not as creepy as it seems. They're just going to watch Brock, who's dressed in a pink apron, caring for his 9 little brothers and sisters, which sort of explains why Brock never went off to challenge the Pokemon League. After this, they go for a walk through the city, Flint and Ash, and Flint explains that after Brock's good-for-nothing father left home to become a Pokemon trainer, his heartbroken mother abandoned them, leaving the eldest child, Brock, to take care of his siblings. Ash feels sympathy for Brock, but he's determined to defeat him nonetheless. Flint recognizes Ash's determination and mentions that he might know of a way Ash can supercharge Pikachu, so he stands a chance.
Wow, I sure never thought of Brock like that.
Brock has 10 little brothers and sisters to take care of, so he could never leave town for regional championships.
Doesn't he have a mom or a dad?
His good-for-nothing father left the family to become a Pokemon trainer, and they never heard from him again. Brock's heartbroken mother tried her best to hold things together, but sadly she passed away. Brock's the only one his little brothers and sisters have left.
I better not listen to any more sad stuff. Next time I have a match with Brock, I might not have the heart to beat him.
A lot going on in this little scene here. First of all, I've got to say, look, Flint and Lola, which is Brock's mother's name, they really should have stopped fucking after about child number 8. Why did they just keep having kids? It's excessive, especially, I don't know. there's a lot of, logistically, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it feels like there's heaps of kids just to, one for a gag, and two for an over-the-top reason for why Brock is, has never gone out on his own. Speaking of, Brock's 10 billion siblings, this episode actually introduces the greatest number of named recurring characters in the anime, which is entirely due to Brock's siblings. So it's a bit of a dubious victory there, but it is the episode that introduces the most recurring characters. There's also an error here. Flint says that Brock has 10 little brothers and sisters when he only actually has 9. It's actually 10 kids in total. So saying he has 10 brothers and sisters is incorrect because of being counting himself as a brother. Major dub change here. In the English dub, instead of saying Brock's mother left the family to Brock's care, Flint tells Ash that she died after trying to raise the family on her own. This resulted in an inconsistency in the English dub because Brock's mother, Lola, appears in A Family That Battles Together Stays Together, as well as in several other episodes afterwards, which, man, I said in the last episode I want to give 4Kids credit where credit's due, but they really fucked up here saying Brock's mother passed away. It just creates a massive error when his mother does return, and just in general, if we're taking it as face value as, it's not an error, and Flint's saying that, and he's just saying that, it's not an error, it makes Flint seem like an even bigger asshole in the context of the show, because, you're saying Brock's mother is dead when she really isn't. That's really not necessary. Just in general, it seems like a really dumb idea for 4Kids to invent something that major for the dub. I'm sure when they were dubbing it at the time, they're like, oh, Brock's mother's not there. Why don't we just say she's dead? We're never gonna hear from her ever again. It's not gonna pop up. Why would this character's mother ever be an important thing down the track? I don't think they accounted for it becoming such a cultural phenomenon that it'll be going for so long that, we really are gonna get multiple episodes featuring this character again. I don't know, it's such a bold thing to do when the source material doesn't say anything about death, and then you just invent that. It's just so weird that this one little scene here has so much craziness surrounding it. It's about to get even crazier. In Pocket Monsters the Animation, which is a Japanese exclusive novelization of the anime, it actually implies that Flint is not Lola's only husband, and he may not actually be the father of some of Brock's siblings, as it mentions in that novelization that Lola married again and again to keep the gym going due to each husband actually fleeing from their responsibilities at the gym, which also resulted in her having lots of kids. So, again, like the 4Kids dub, why is that added in? That's such a random thing to add in, especially to a show aimed at a younger demographic. It's really weird, and it might be one of my favorite bits of trivia that we've encountered in the podcast so far. But finally, we return back to the episode. Flint and Ash travel to a hydroelectric plant where Flint hooks up the generator to the electric sacs in Pikachu's cheeks. As the river is bone dry, Ash must run on a large water wheel to generate the electricity which flows into Pikachu. Wonder where we've seen that kind of thing before. Misty shows up and offers to lend Ash her water-type Pokemon, however Ash refuses and continues charging Pikachu until the generator overloads and Pikachu's electricity lights up the night sky. So, as I sort of alluded to there, the Pikachu powering up scene is essentially the same concept as Ash riding the bike in Pokemon Emergency. Ash is essentially riding the water wheel here and then powering up Pikachu's electric sacs, which is, it's identical to what happens in Pokemon Emergency, except Ash uses a bike there. So yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't know if it was supposed to be like a kind of a nod to that, or if they're trying to... I really don't know why they're kind of reusing that. It's just a little bit of a quirk, I guess. I feel like this sort of thing is kind of the equivalent to, in the Pokemon world, of using performance-enhancing drugs. It's not really training. It would be one thing for Flint to be like, we're going to put Pikachu through some rigorous training, but they're sort of just injecting extra energy and power into Pikachu's electric sacs, which... what's the difference between that and, using steroids? I don't know, it's borderline, you know. It seems kind of sketchy there, Flint, especially coming from a weird sketchy dude like Flint. You know, I wouldn't really trust him to be doing something completely above board here. And finally, I know Misty means well when she interrupts here, and she wants to offer Ash the use of her water Pokemon, but there is no way in hell Ash was ever going to use her Pokemon, even if he was on board from the start with like getting advice and tips from her. Ash would never be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to use your water Pokemon so I can cheaply win this gym badge. I feel like Misty's proposed solution is way cheaper than the way Ash actually gets the badge in the end, and probably way cheaper than the way he gets any of his badges throughout Kanto, and he does get it in some pretty cheap ways. The next day, Ash returns to the Pewter City Gym for a rematch with confidence. Brock is also confident after his easy victory in the first battle. The two quickly start off the rematch. Brock starts off with Geodude, and this time Ash sends out Pidgeotto. However, the normal and flying type Pokemon can't hurt Geodude and is quickly knocked out. Ash recalls it and sends out Pikachu. Misty watches and cheers on Ash from the rafters, though she is severely outnumbered by Brock's supportive siblings.
I'm back!
Haven't you learned your lesson yet?
We're ready for you this time, Brock!
We'll see.
And again, I had to mention about Brock's attitude. He's such an arrogant arsehole here. And every time he would kind of be really, you know, sort of dismissive of Ash, it just is so jarring. I'm like, Brock, geez, I'm not used to you being like this. So the battle continues, and Brock comments on how weak Pikachu and Ash are, and Ash retorts by commanding Pikachu to attack. And it easily knocks down Geodude, which, I mean, technically shouldn't be able to happen in the games, and we know by now that the anime runs on its own logic. Brock and Misty are stunned at this. Brock recalls his Geodude and sends out his Onix, and a fearful Pikachu tries another electric attack, damaging the gym instead of the opposing Onix. Onix ends up wrapping Pikachu with Bind again, but Pikachu makes a comeback with its new attack Thunderbolt, which manages to only injure Onix. Just as Pikachu is about to pass out, Brock suddenly spares it by calling Onix off. He tells Ash to forfeit again before any more harm comes to Pikachu. Ash protests though, wanting to finish the battle. And before I move on, I just wanted to say this battle would really mess with a kid's understanding of type advantages, with Pikachu quite clearly doing damage to both Geodude and Onix here, which technically shouldn't be possible. Suddenly, the gym sprinklers are set off by a fire that was caused by Pikachu's earlier electric attack. Water sprays all over the Onix, weakening it and allowing Pikachu to fight back with another electric attack. Just as Ash is about to command Pikachu to finish Onix off, Brock's brothers and sisters all crowd around Ash, beg him to stop. Brock orders his brothers and sisters not to get involved, but they protest, knowing that Brock's love of Pokemon would make it painful for him to continue the match and watch his Onix get hurt further. At this, Ash calls back his Pikachu and explains that if he defeated Brock now, it would only be because of the sprinklers being set off. He decides he wants to win his badge fair and square, much to Misty's disappointment since he's giving up a very lucky advantage here.
Pikachu, return!
What do you think you're doing? This match isn't over yet, Ash.
Those sprinklers going off was just an accident. Winning the match because of that wouldn't have proved anything. Next time we meet, I'll beat you my way, fair and square.
Maybe.
Just when he finally gets a lucky break, he decides to be a nice guy too.
Going back to Brock's brothers stopping Ash, I really love that Ash initially thinks that he's imagining that Brock's siblings are stopping him. He says something along the lines of, oh no, my conscience is imagining Brock's siblings stopping me from commanding Pikachu to finish Onix off. And then we revealed that it's actually reality. I think it's actually a really, really good gag. Definitely a top shelf gag for the anime so far. And with this battle, Ash still hasn't legitimately finished a Pokemon battle in his 2 weeks, apparently, of being a trainer. His match with Samurai was obviously called off due to a Beedrill attack. He forfeits against Brock the first time, and then he calls off the second match because it would be unfair to continue. So he still hasn't had a a Pokemon battle that actually ends in a conclusive, result. And I don't think we actually get that for a while. I'm pretty sure he gets Cerulean's gym badge handed to him as well without the battle finishing, so Yeah, it's going to be a while before we get a Pokemon battle that Ash completes legitimately. So Ash leaves the Pewter Gym and apologizes to Pikachu for being so tough on him. He turns around after hearing someone calling and notices that it's Brock running up to him. Surprisingly, Brock gives him the Boulder Badge. Ash doesn't want to accept the badge initially, but Brock insists that Ash has earned it through his kindness to Pokemon. Brock continues to explain that rather than becoming a great Pokemon trainer, his dream is to become a great Pokemon breeder. But he can't do this because of his family duties. He gives Ash the badge and asks him to fulfill his dream, to which Ash agrees.
To tell you the truth, I get more pleasure from raising Pokemon than from making them battle. I don't care about being a great Pokemon trainer. I want to become the world's best breeder. But I can't leave here because I have to look after my brothers and sisters. Ash, I want you to take this and fulfill my dream. Will you do that for me?
I will. And I'll do my best to deserve this, too.
So this episode starts the trend that annoys quite a lot of people in Kanto, where Ash is just gifted gym badges despite not actually defeating the gym. I did a little bit of research for this, and the only gym leaders he legitimately beats in Kanto are Lieutenant Surge, Koga, and Blaine. People complain about this, but it does make perfect sense for Ash and his character at the time, because, I mean, as we saw in this episode, he's very arrogant about his abilities, but he's still a complete novice. He hasn't grasped many of the basics of Pokemon. So far, he gets through on luck a lot of the time, luck and just sheer determination. And he's really unwilling to kind of learn off the wealth of knowledge that's around him. And that all culminates in the Pokemon League when he goes down because of something that really could have been preventable, like using his Charizard that doesn't want to obey him. So I understand the criticisms of Ash not legitimately earning gym badges in Kanto, but I think it does, as I was mentioning earlier, it's great for the character arc. Suddenly, Flint reappears and removes his beard and hat, revealing that he is Brock's good-for-nothing father. He explains that he avoided returning to his family because he was a failure of a Pokemon trainer. Ash puzzles over the fact that Flint helped him instead of his son, and Flint explains that Ash's helplessness reminded him of himself, which really takes a hit to Ash's ego. Flint is ready to take back the responsibilities that he abandoned years ago now, which Brock returns to him, along with a long list of tasks for him to remember while taking care of the children. I thought here Brock really should be far more angry at Flint. He straight up just abandoned the family completely, all because he was a failure as a Pokemon trainer, which seems a little much for, you failed as a Pokemon trainer, so you're just going to abandon your family forever. A little bit weird, but I do enjoy the fake out where they make you think that, Brock is about to rip into his dad for all those years of pent up, frustration, anger, resentment. But instead, he just starts detailing all the different little tidbits that he's learned about raising the kids and like what they specifically like to eat and drink, and like needing to learn how to sew. It did make me laugh. And Brock randomly joining Ash on his journey here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, to be perfectly honest. It's really out of the blue. Brock doesn't really seem to like Ash based on their conversations during the gym battles that they have. And then all of a sudden he's like, you know what, you're kind to Pokemon. I'm going to travel with you for the next X amount of years of my life. It's a little bit strange. So later that evening, Ash and Brock travel on the road out of Pewter City. Ash insists that he's glad to have him along because he's got someone to talk to now. Brock kind of mentions, what about that girl that's following you? Which Ash is kind of a little bit dismissive, just being like, oh, yeah, her. She's a thing. Misty is several paces behind them, and she starts yelling not to forget about her bicycle that he destroyed. Ash and Pikachu start to run off, followed by Brock. They're trying to lose Misty, though she remains in pursuit. We then see, to close out the episode, Team Rocket, who have managed to finally burst out of their trap via a big-ass drill that I'm not sure where they got that from, but it's here apparently, only to end up being trampled by Ash and his friends.
I told you I'd get us out of this.
This was all...
Hey, Ash!
Your fault! Wait for me!
Come back here! Ash, come on!
Buried alive. then trampled.
We've hit rock bottom!
Yeah!
I really do prefer Team Rocket cameos like this rather than having to shoehorn them into almost every single episode. I do enjoy the occasional episode where Team Rocket are the antagonists, like the main antagonists of the episode, and it's kind of built around one of their schemes. However, they do get to the point where they're just like including them in every single episode for the sake of it, and it gets annoying. Whereas I prefer every now and then when you don't have a really solid story for Team Rocket, just include them as like this kind of cameo where you think at the start of the episode, oh, they might have a part to play here, but they end up, kind of just being detoured and not having a major impact on the plot. And a bit of trivia, this is the first episode in which Team Rocket appears but has no effect on the plot. So I really think the episodes where that happens and they don't kind of force a Team Rocket story are a lot better. But yeah, that does it for the episode. We've come to an end. Now it's time for kind of my overall thoughts on the quality of Showdown in Pewter City. I think this is a good episode. It's a great way to introduce Brock, and while I do think his weirdly arrogant personality and he's just such a cold character here, it's kind of just a little bit off-putting to see. Maybe that's because I know what's to come for his character. Despite that, I think the episode is quite good. Yeah, just like I said, it's a little bit confusing, and despite that kind of cold character that he's given, we do see the other softer side of his personality, like when he's taking care of the family, when Flint and Ash stop by his house, which, I don't know, yeah, it's weird. It's kind of a weird clash, and maybe I just have to assume that Brock's putting on a facade when he's the gym leader. Seeing him care for his siblings basically sort of sets him up to be Ash's mentor down the line, and assume that role that it basically starts from the next episode, which is a nice way to kind of introduce Brock. And Misty, is going to end up playing the more antagonistic role and trying to put down Ash's abilities at every turn. So overall, I'm a fan of this episode. My major gripe is that we don't get a whole lot of gym battling here. The first battle is over in a flash, and then the second one is also relatively quick. And again, it doesn't end in a result. I think it is pretty crazy that we're 5 episodes into the show and we still don't have a single trainer battle that has come to completion. Like, that's a whole week's worth of episodes with the way that the show was airing in America. They were airing it 5 days a week. So it's a whole week without a single trainer battle coming to completion. I know, yeah, it's a little bit weird that we've had 3 battles now and none of them have actually had a decisive winner. But that's all for my thoughts. I do think it's a good episode and definitely one of the stronger episodes so far in the handful that we've covered. So the recap of the major events that happen here: Ash and Misty reach Pewter City and meet Brock, the Pewter Gym leader. Ash has his first gym battle at the Pewter Gym. Ash forfeits this battle against Brock, suffering his very first loss. Ash's Pikachu learns Thunderbolt. Ash has a rematch with Brock, but eventually forfeits again. Brock follows Ash and gives him his first badge, the Boulder Badge. Brock then joins Ash and Misty on their journey. Now we've finally come to the section of the podcast where I detail Ash Ketchum's win-loss record, and we finally have an update to it. After 4 straight episodes of nothing to add here, we finally can add that he is 0 wins and 1 loss. Now you might be thinking, what? He had 2 battles in this episode? I'm not counting the second battle as a loss. Even though it does say that Ash forfeited, it's far more like the battle ended in a no contest, because Ash was definitely going to win, and I mean, he technically does forfeit, but you really can't put that down as a loss, because he was going to win that. It's really not a loss, so I'm just keeping the first one as a loss and saying that he is 0-1 to start his trainer journey, his battling journey. But with all that said and done, it's time for some more trivia. This episode was one of the select episodes featured on the Volume 20 Onyx DVD from Viz Media's Pokémon All-Star series. Got got a bit of trivia here about just how far behind the dub was compared to the original Japanese. 3 days after this episode aired in English, Ash actually won his 8th badge in the Japanese airing, which just shows how far behind we were initially, but the show steams back in, airing five episodes a week. And finally, in the 4Kids dub of the anime, Roxanne, the first gym leader of the Hoenn region, actually says that the Pewter City Gym is the flagship of all the Rock-type gyms. So, a little bit of a very obscure bit of trivia there. A couple of errors that I didn't mention throughout the episode. When Ash begins both of his battles with Brock, the giant rock in the middle of the platform that moves into position actually disappears. And, we've got the most glaring error. Ash's advantage over Brock should not have technically worked. Ground-type Pokemon are immune to electric-type moves. And this is the first of many times Pikachu's electric attacks defy type matchups to change the result of a battle. Well, with all that, we'll move into the Pokemail for this week. Sorry, for this episode. And the question of the episode I'm asking all the listeners today is, what's your favourite Brock moment in the anime? There are so many to choose from. It's probably going to be pretty hard to pick. I am pretty partial to the return of Brock after the Orange Islands, where he's dealing with the heartbreak of being quite clearly turned down by Professor Ivy. I think that's probably my favourite one. It stands out the most to me. I do have a soft spot though for his return in Sinnoh. I don't know why, I just remember watching that on a weekday morning on Cartoon Network, and just, that's always for some reason been a Brock moment that's stuck with me. But yeah, there's so many Brock moments. Obviously, unlike Misty, who doesn't continue traveling with Ash after Johto, Brock goes to Hoenn and Sinnoh. So yeah, there's a whole lot of Brock floating around, and I'm sure everybody has a different favorite Brock moment because of just how many there are. But that does us for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, basically any podcast service that you can find, we're on it. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMN Pod to keep up with the latest updates for the show, and I'm on Twitter personally as @SauceMarlow. But as I said, that's all for today. I really hope you join me again next episode as I take a look back at Clefairy and the Moonstone, which is really the first episode that is mostly filler except for one tiny off-screen moment that coincidentally also happens to feature Brock.